Welcome to Recovery TV Live. Today we're going to talk about, is there a place for fantasy in a healthy sexuality? So don't go anywhere. Welcome to Recovery TV Live. We're going to talk about the role of fantasy in a healthy sexuality. But before we jump into that, I just want to remind you, if you're watching the rebroadcast version of this on YouTube, just ask you to please subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to ring the bell so that you can be notified when more videos like this are posted. So we're going to address something that's really difficult for a lot of people to address, which is the role or the function of fantasy in someone's sexuality. And one of the questions that we often get is it healthy to have fantasy in our sexuality? And I think mostly because historically in our culture it's been shamed, which we're going to do a video on that too.
And I think that we would just kind of start answering that question with a very basic answer, which is yes, it is healthy to incorporate fantasy into your sexuality and specific behaviors. I think sometimes people hear the word fantasy and they have an immediate reaction to it, that it sounds silly or ridiculous or over the top or even dangerous. But fantasy is, I think Josh uses the word, a way to access your imagination. And being playful and using your imagination is very good for you. It's a great way to reduce stress. It's a great way to process your feelings in a different way. And so just in general, using your imagination, being playful, and so engaging in fantasy is really good for you.
Right, and so some key words there that Carrie mentioned is like being playful, using your imagination. These are things that we do when we're children all the time, and for the most part, people don't complain too much about that unless you're, disrupting what's going on in the home or something like that, or being annoying or something. Anybody that's a parent knows when your children's play can kind of be a little too much sometimes, but they don't usually get in trouble for being playful or for using their imagination. And then for some reason, as we grow up, we're kind of encouraged to work ourselves out of our imagination, and then eventually when we launch into the adult world, we're just focused on working more and playing less, when playing is really essential to relationships and the health of relationships.
Absolutely, right. I would say that Josh and I, as couples therapists, will often hear from our clients that they're not spending very much time engaging in play. They don't do fun things. And a lot of the research around healthy couples is that couples who regularly play together stay together.
Right.
And, one vacation a year isn't going to do it. That's not enough play.
Right.
And so I think that when we start talking about fantasy, and especially sexual fantasies, that can be something that can be dismissed or shoved off as silly or unnecessary. And we really want to challenge that assumption, and we really want for adults to think about, how can I connect with fantasy, and how can that become something that I actually value and protect?
Right. And to be clear too, Carrie's not suggesting that people need to take more than one vacation, but what we're saying is that if that's you might need to be doing that. Yeah. But if vacation's the only time that you're playing, it's just not enough. Right. You need to be playing regularly throughout your relationship. And we're not just talking about in the bedroom here. We're talking about what I would say outside of the bedroom. Creating the non-sexual intimacy through play is really important. And one of my favorite quotes when it comes to healthy sexuality is that foreplay begins after the last orgasm. So if you want to really create something healthy in the bedroom, you need to be playing outside of the bedroom.
That's right. And I think another, just to expand even on the idea of play and the way that kids play without an end in sight, right? If you go observe children on the playground, the game of tag is never won. No one ever conquers, right? The playing of astronauts, someone never ends it when they go to the moon and arrive back at the space station.
Right.
It's perpetual, it's ongoing, it just keeps growing and expanding.
Right.
And that's kind of the way we would want to even map that into sexual fantasy, is that there's not a destination. there's not a specific goal in mind. It really is just playing and enjoying yourself for the sake of pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what makes fantasy healthy for someone's sexuality.
Okay.
And so, we talked about play, and that creates intimacy. And one of the things that I really do believe is that it helps you access a very innocent part of yourself to share with your partner. So it's a very deep, intimate part of yourself that you wouldn't feel safe sharing outside of that context with somebody else. And so this particular person that you've chosen to engage with sexually gets to experience this side of you. And historically, I think that has been shamed in our culture, and we're going to do a segment on that too, to talk about how shame culture plays in there. But it really is a very vulnerable state of existence, and a deep, in my mind, a very innocent side of you that you're letting that side show up in your sexuality.
Yeah, I think that's, another kind of spin on that is it's a great way to connect to eroticism and sensuality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, engaging in fantasy behavior can set the stage for connecting with the erotic and the sensual that's around you in your world. And
Mm-hmm.
we know that when you connect to the sensory, when you connect to the energy of things and objects and people around you, the quality of your sexual experience is significantly better. And so fantasy is a great vehicle, I think, to connect to that.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the balance of escapism and presence.
So fantasy is a way to be somebody different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that has the potential for a lot of pleasure and a lot of joy, a great stress reliever. It can also be concerning because it can dissociate you or take you away from who you are or your relationship. And so, like most things in mental health, it's probably about balance. It's not abandoning one in replacement of the other, but it's about how do you find the balance between escaping, right, and having a good time, being somebody else for a little while, and not completely checking out.
Absolutely. And so, when you think of a lot of people, when they think of fantasy and sexuality, they're thinking more of escaping more than being present. And I think that balance is really key. And so we're going to dive into the next segment. We're talking about when fantasy can become unhealthy, and we're going to address what that looks like. But when it comes to the different forms or what fantasy might look like in a sexual relationship that's healthy, it can take the form of role playing. It can be as minimal as just as wearing lingerie. And there's a whole array of different things that a couple can do to use their imagination to create fantasy or utilize fantasy in their healthy sexuality. And one thing I really appreciate, that something that Dr. Alexandra Katahakis said, is that you're taking a risk by doing this, by sharing this with your partner. This is something I want to do, and when your partner is receptive of that, you might end up feeling really silly, or it might be a kind of a silly experience. And what I love that she said is that we could end up laughing our heads off or having a really good erotic time together. She said either way we're having fun.
That's right.
And I really appreciate her saying that.
Yeah.
So that concludes this segment of this sexual fantasy series that we're doing. And so we appreciate you joining us. But here in just a minute, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about when sexual fantasy becomes unhealthy. So we'll see you back here.